I'm Mike Bredner, and we're here at the University of Alaska at the Governor's Conference on Alaska's Future and Choices. And with me is Bill Hall, who is a longtime participant in various areas of government, and now is with a group in Anchorage that is called, Bill, what do we call it? Let's Talk Anchorage?
We call it Let's Talk Anchorage, a library-based program in civic dialogue.
So you're here, what do you see happening here?
Well, I think the key thing is the governor defined 3 objectives for this, and the last one is how do we start a conversation with Alaskans? And that's my interest, since that's partly what I'm doing. In our dialogues, we call it Doing Democracy in our program at the libraries in Anchorage.
So you've been around, that's not easy to do. I mean, to get people involved, to get them to focus on things that is going to affect their lives downstream here.
Yes, as we attempted in our program to address public issues, it became apparent to me that there's a difference between politics and democracy. And as I think about this program here that we're engaged in, I distinguish it more as democracy than politics. And in that, I think that means we are trying to discover what might be the public will in regard to important public decisions about what kind of government do we want.
And of course that in the midst of a certain amount of physical stress that's going on right now, and it's going to go on for the next 2 years.
You know, I wonder if that's an accurate characterization of the issue. Alaska is a wealthy state. And not only the state of Alaska with the permanent fund and the resources we have, but individual Alaskans are well off. So I'm thinking if we had the will to fund government, then are we really at a place where we can't afford the level of government that we have, if we really had the political will?
And we have choices like what? We have permanent fund
Yeah, and I think the permanent fund issue is one that I think is important to clarify, and that is that of the 3 uses of permanent fund earnings, one goes to dividends. In 2014, that was about $1.2 billion. One goes to inflation proofing, which in 2014 was about $540-some million. And $1.75 billion in 2014 was the unexpended earnings of the permanent fund. So some of the economists are telling us that we could actually use some of the unexpended earnings of the permanent fund to pay for state government without jeopardizing permanent fund dividends. I don't think many Alaskans are aware of that distinction.
Well, there's a certain mythology, I think we all accept, that says, gee, Alaska is expensive. And with the petroleum money, well, have we made ourselves more expensive with just excess spending?
Well, the data that we've been shown says that our level of government hasn't increased that dramatically in the last 5 or 10 years. So we haven't been extravagant in expanding government, at least that's what I understand. I'd like to get back to our capacity to pay for the kind of government we want. We have a constitutional mandate to maximize the value from our natural resources. I'm not so sure we're doing that. We also have a constitutional mandate that says we have corresponding obligations to one another and to the state. So does that mean we have an obligation to pay for some of what we receive?
Well, that's a good point. And we haven't had to do that much since 1981, when we repealed an income tax.
Yes. And I think, again, it's a matter of public will, and so in a way, a crisis or a gap or a perceived cash flow problem, call this what you want, it is an opportunity not only to say, well, we got a problem to solve, but it's an opportunity for us to sort of revisit what is our vision for Alaska, what are the values that we have, what kind of state do we want to create, which all should precede the question of how do we spend the money and how do we raise the money.
And in terms of, we have to understand, what our programs are. I mean, do you think the average Alaska sort of understands where we are right now?
No, probably not. I think
And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we're doing. But I think back to the story told about Franklin Roosevelt, who told people who had come to him to say that this is an important public program, and he said, "Yes, you've convinced me. Now go out and make me do it." I think if we're looking at this governor's objective of this as a conversation with Alaskans, so the question is, what are the Alaskan people willing to say to our elected representative? It's okay to consider this, it's okay to do this, because this is what is necessary for us to have the kind of government we want.
And it's sort of confusing as to how we send that message. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, I guess.
Yes, it is. And I think as citizens, from the democratic point of view, a lot of detail just confuses us. It's a complex issue. So the difficulty is, how do we clarify it in terms of how does it relate to my individual life, my needs today, the needs of my kids? Then I think much of what we need to keep in mind is, how do we make decisions today that are going to benefit future generations?
How do we get to those decisions? I mean,
yeah, and
the
again,
steps to get there.
Go ahead.
The steps to get there. I mean,
yeah, and we don't know all the answers, and there are a lot of unknowns. But I really get back to that question in the Constitution. I have a corresponding obligation to my fellow Alaskans and to the state of Alaska. So what does that mean for me? What should I be thinking about my responsibilities here?
Bill, it's good to talk to you, and we've been talking to Bill Hall, who right now is Let's Talk Anchorage. And Bill, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mike.